Kia ora, moena. Ko sleep boom tuku maunga, ko trio tuku awa, ko rangatota tō maunga e whakaruru ho ana I te moana o te Waitemata. No Ireland me England o ko Tapunga, no Tamaki Makaurau aho, ko Jacinta tuku Angoa. Kia ora. So my ancestors came here in the 1840s. And they were given an acre of land. And my family basically has worked on the land about every second generation. Obviously, the kids go, shit, that's hard. Excuse me, there's going to be a little bit of swearing. I hope your cameras can cope with that. So I'm one of the generation that hasn't been growing. In fact, I'm going to tell you a bit of a story about what happens when the right people, problems and ideas come together. So this is me. I'm a learning designer. I create e-learning. I work with technology, computers, VR, AR, chatbots. I work with corporates like Fonterra and with their safety inductions, and I work with the universities creating e-learning for kids to learn about digital technologies for NCEA. I also, however, I live and work in the rural south of Auckland. I'm a mother of two, and at the top of our hill, we have the dairy farms, and at the bottom of our hill, we have the crops. And it's a beautiful red, rich soil of Patamahoe and Pukekohe. Now, what happened was, I decided I was going to do a Masters in Future Technologies. This is about the end of 2019. Think about that for a second. And so I thought I'll probably end up creating some kind of cool educational app or finding out how people learn best with e-learning. And then we had some storms in our area. And I don't know if you can tell, but those are onions. And it's not just on the side of the road, it's filling the ditches on the side. And we started to have more and more of these storms that were affecting our growers. And I really felt for them. Sometimes it was onions, sometimes it was potatoes. And I thought, gee, that must be really hard work. Glad I'm not doing that. And then this happened, 1 month into my Masters. So suddenly we're all locked down. I'd just been to Australia for a conference and come back with a really bad flu. And so I spent 8 weeks at home, and you start thinking about things, and you start thinking about how hard it is for growers. People in our area that were growing lettuce for restaurants were putting bags of it on their fences with clothes pegs for the locals because they couldn't sell it. And I realised how fragile our food chain suddenly was. And my education app suddenly seemed a little less important. Also, there were staff shortages. Now, this was before the pandemic. It was worse during the pandemic, and it's still a problem now. And they couldn't get people to pick the crops. Some people stopped growing the crops because they couldn't get people to pick the crops. Here and overseas, things were just being left to rot in the ground and wasted food. Now, our population's growing. We need more food, not less, but it needs to get to the right people at the right times, and we need the people to grow it and pick it. So I started researching during my Masters about vertical farms. Now, that's when you're growing indoors. You use LED lights instead of sunlight. You can do it in a shipping container. You can do it in a warehouse. The infrastructure cost is quite high, and the cost of the electricity is quite high because you're not getting that free sunshine. But you can have robots to do some of the labour, depending on how much money you're willing to spend. So I started to play. I got myself a little robot arm, and it was harder than I thought. It also turned out the real thing is much more expensive than you think, and not really suitable for small-scale farms. I started looking at the lighting, and I thought maybe we could do light pulsing, where the light goes off for a fraction of a second or a few seconds, and that will save on some of the electricity costs. But before I got into it, my lecturer said, you've got to do some research, check this stuff is actually a problem. So I started to talk to growers. And these were their challenges: labour, weather extremes. Their greenhouses were too hot for local workers, and that's how they had the schemes, bringing people from the islands to work. Pests and price pressure. Everybody wanted it cheaper. The supermarkets, the consumer, everybody wanted it cheaper. So they couldn't raise their costs. I also talked with potential growers, which I think you'll find interesting. People who'd always wanted to get into it and have their own farms, and what had stopped them. And the three things were not having their own land, not having enough capital to get their own land, and knowledge. They didn't know how to grow and to grow well. The other thing I asked them is, what if you could use robots? Would you like the robots to do all the work? And they said, well, actually, no. We would like to get into it because we're interested in plants and growing. We'd like to do some of the work. We'd quite like to have some robots to help us, but we're quite happy to get our hands dirty as well. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. People would rather have collaborative robots than robots doing it all for them, full automation. So what do? Well, you build a vertical farm in your backyard, don't you? Took me 5 months to get a 20-foot container in the middle of a pandemic, so I had to be a bit patient. But it became a family affair, as you can see. My daughter was opening every box. She was putting the garden kits together. My husband, an industrial electrician, kitted out the electrics for me, and we got the aircon put in. That's done to a 2-metre high washdown standard. Now, the idea was we were going to have professional racks with professional gutters. Factories were shut, and we couldn't get them. So we got 2 hydroponic kits. That's my daughter helping with the seeding. And then we started growing. If you're interested, this is the result after a couple of weeks. Pretty close, but you can start to see it's a bit sparse where we had the light pulsing going on. I'll just skip to that. That's the end result. I had COVID for a week, and so I didn't get to go into the container. So that is not what the lettuce should look like, by the way. It is big. But you can see the big difference with the light pulsing. It was too much. The plants didn't thrive. The other thing, how do I go back? The other thing is this. You've heard of the metaphorical green thumb, where people are good at growing? I have the metaphorical brown thumb. I can kill a plant at 20 feet without even looking at it for a week. So I had brown spots on the edge of my leaves. I had brown spots in the middle of my leaves, and I spent hours looking on YouTube trying to figure out what was going on. Because I couldn't find courses on what I wanted to learn. Courses on horticulture, yes, lots about soil, very little on hydroponics or hydroponic engineering, about how to build a hydroponic system. So lots of LinkedIn and YouTube. So everything I thought was a good idea, nah. All my hypotheses were wrong. But what I did learn was farm design is really important, knowledge is super important, and sustainability was an issue. Because I don't know if you noticed, but I was growing that in plastic foam sponges, and they were going to be thrown out at the end of it, and that really bothered me. Now, the farm design was another thing. Those garden kits, they ended up with water in the bottom of them because of the round design, and when you pulled them apart to clean them, it went everywhere. It was such a mess, and I spent hours cleaning. It was a waste of time, and that's where that farm design comes in. So, before I'd finished the Masters, I saw a post on LinkedIn from Paul saying, we've noticed there's a difficulty getting people to go into STEM and into agriculture. What are your ideas? And I was like, I know. It's probably the longest reply to a post he's got on LinkedIn. Because I knew that my daughter loved this stuff. She thought it was cool. So I said, you've got to get hydroponic kits in their hands, robots for them to play with, structured lessons plans for the teacher. And Paul said, right, come in and have a chat. So, next thing you know, we have a proposal. Let's do some garden kits and some robots. Again, during a pandemic, this was quite hard to get all this stuff together. But we ended up getting it done. And we got 6 of these out to schools. We tried to get diverse schools, some rural, some town. We also had some schools that were full immersion te reo as well. We included activity sheets, instruction sheets on how to grow in the hydroponic kits. We also had Jiffy peat pots, so they could compare the two. We had them grow inside and grow outside and compare the two. We had them think about the components of it. What could you reuse? What would have to be thrown out? What would be a good sustainable alternative? What about the electricity? In New Zealand, it's sustainable. What about overseas? So getting them to think about all of these things, we also got them to think about growing on Mars. We did half-finished programs for the robot that they could finish. Notice it's got block-based, because we went for age 10 and 11. You can also do Python for your age 15 and 16. And these were the kinds of comments we got. The teachers loved the lessons. They loved the kids loved the hydroponic kits. The robots were a problem. That was hard for the teachers to learn in the time that they had. There was only one robot arm, because they're bloody expensive, amongst a group of 30 kids. So how do you get that to work? But the kids really loved it. They were excited about it. The teachers were, wait till next term. Now that I know how to work it, now that I know what I can do with it, just wait. And you can see I've used highly sophisticated techniques to mask the children's faces in these pictures. But this is them having a great time with their kits. So here were the findings from this, is that the kits needed to stay in the schools. There are some great programs out there, but they tend to lend the kits and then take them back. The teachers actually needed to keep the kits in there to build on what they were doing and to get familiar with them. We found these kits were becoming like infrastructure in the school. Other teachers were seeing what they were doing and were like, could I use that next term? If you're not using the robot, could I do something with the robot? It was spreading amongst the school, but it had to stay in the school for that to happen. Every teacher wanted to keep the kit, but the robot arm was just no good. It was too hard to use. It was too many kids trying to use it. So our solution for that would be either to just have the base kits of the robots, where they're just moving the plants from one point to another instead of using the arm, or moving to nutrient controllers. What we use in our greenhouses right now for managing the nutrients in the water systems that feed the plants, and what we're going to be using in future as we get into more covered crops with the weather extremes and indoor growing. So that can work now and in the future. We're going to keep track, by the way, of these kids and whether they start taking agricultural courses when they're older and in that area. So if you're curious about the master's research, basically we said that the farm design, having knowledge-based software where you could look up stuff easily, having training that was specific to what you needed to know was important, but also the vertical farming, these kits, these bigger ones that you can get overseas in cabinets, these can create a new generation of kids who are interested in growing, who are interested in engineering for growing, who are interested in robotics for growing, who can bring us into that next stage. And creating microfarms to upskill adults and bring them into the industry as well. We started Verb Farms just as part of the Masters. It's a social enterprise. So at the moment we're kind of sitting around waiting for funding, and we've gotten a bit distracted because we thought about that sustainable problem with those plastic foam box and the rock wool alternatives, which are melted at 1700 degrees and transported across the world in their carbon emissions. And we're exploring wool. And I can't show you what we've made because we're actually going to do a patent on it. And we're exploring a grant with Callaghan. And what would be so exciting would be able to show the kids, hey, look what we researched, look what we came across when we were doing this, and these ideas and how they turn into these cool innovations and make New Zealand world leading. And isn't it cool? And don't you want to do that? So let's keep up the curiosity. Let's follow those ideas and see where we go and see what we grow. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Jacinta?
Cool. Moving on. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Here comes the microphone.
Great. Is that on? Yeah, it is. Great presentation, thanks, Jacinta. It looks like you've been very busy over the last few years.
Yeah.
In the spirit of collaboration, which was identified by the previous speaker, how does that kit, or how does that idea that you've got actually spread further and get to a critical mass that it is influencing at a level that gives us something meaningful?
That's a very good question. Basically, I'd want to see a kit like this. It can be ours, it can be somebody else's, but agricultural stuff like this in every school so that it's part of the curriculum. Because they need to grow up with it. Those experiences, those exposures that the gentleman talked about, we need to be providing that in the schools, and not just outdoors, which we are doing with the garden programs, but showing the technology that you can use with it and the science of it as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah, that's a very good question. One of the things I'm hoping is that if the wool thing takes off, that can help self-fund it, but otherwise we're applying for grants and hoping for funding.
I've got one here. Tatiana down here.
Yep.
We know of a program called Agribusiness in Schools, which takes teenagers through and shows them primary industries. You're proposing to take that even further to primary schools. What do you need to scale this and be able to deliver?
Money.
Funding. Support from industries.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Kia ora. I just wondered why you decided to focus on primary school and not secondary.
It was actually something we talked about at the beginning, and they have found that children tend to start making their decisions about their careers earlier than you think. We were originally going to go even younger, but if they haven't been exposed to it by that kind of age of 10, 11, by the time you're getting to 15, they've already decided the topics they're going to do to get into university or to do their qualification. It's too late. You need to have that exposure earlier. Does it? Yeah.
Oh, around the back here, just one moment.
Kia ora. Just a quick question. Have you talked to House of Science at all? I know they've got kits in primary schools as well, so it'd be good to sort of partner up. I know they have quite a lot of funding and good evaluation as well.
They're fantastic. They do some really cool stuff. What they do with their kits is they go out to the schools and then come back again, but they support it during the thing. They do something different. They do hydroponic gardens, so there is absolutely a place for all of these things. Yeah.
We do actually have a bit of extra time if there's no more for Jacinta. If Ian wouldn't mind, if anyone has questions for Ian in this last 5-10 minutes before morning tea. No pressure, Ian, but if you're happy to take questions.
Right.
I just thought unless there are any more for Jacinta. No. Did anyone want to ask anything? Oh, here we go. Thanks, Catherine.
Kia ora. Jacinta, just the learning design aspect and trying to get it into, the vocational education system, you struggled with it and things like that. Have you got any suggestions on that front?
I should have mentioned here before, but I got a teacher to help me with the lesson plan. So I'm an e-learning designer and a learning designer, but schools are very different. So you have to design it so it works with their systems. Like we created a safety plan for them, so they didn't have to think about it. we had instruction sheets, so I didn't have to think about it. So we're just trying to make it as easy for the teachers as possible. So they've got enough on their plate, so just trying to make it easy is my answer. Does that help? And yeah, use a qualified teacher. Oh.
Coming.
Kia ora, Jacinta. My question's around the schools that these kids got sent out to. So you said that one of the schools that it got sent out to were total immersion schools.
Yes.
So how did that work in that environment, in like the total immersion? Because obviously,
it was done in English. So, I don't know. They didn't actually speak about it from that side of things. So, but I can get the details for you and we can talk about it offline.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it was just more around, because this is, obviously this, the food and fibre, at Kura, this is what we grew up learning. So bringing in the technology, the aspect to it, I was just curious on what that would look like for our kura kaupapa kids or for our Māori, who this is their everyday, bar the technology side of things.
I might be able to answer from a different point of view. I worked on the Digital Technologies project with the STEM Online team at Auckland universities. So we were creating e-learning for 15 and 16-year-olds. The original courses they did were, they made Te Reo versions. But the Te Reo versions had very little take-up. And so I'm not sure if it was because of the technical language or the depth of the language, but it had a lot less. It was really interesting that they provided it, but it wasn't used, and I'm not sure why. I don't know if they were going to do some more research in that. But yeah, it's an interesting area.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again for that presentation, really good. I suppose it's a supplementary question off the question before in regards to teachers. As you said, they're very busy people and you can go and create things as simple as possible, but it still gets that, we hear it time and time again, we're too busy, we can't add anything else. Do you have any sort of insight from your experiences on how we can be working more to be able to help fit it into what already is there?
Yes. So when we looked at the lesson plans, we looked at the current curriculum and what they needed to be doing for that curriculum and fitted it to that. So rather than going, we want to teach them this, we were like, they need to teach the kids this, so how can we provide that to them with this kit? Does that make sense? Yeah. Great. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.